In this video I'm going to show you how you can work out the value of a stamp collection. Now this is going to take you some time, but if you use some of these rules that I'm going to give you, you'll be able to sift through a very large collection and highlight those that require further study. So basically I'll help you screen through your entire stamp collection and say this one could be something, this one probably isn't. So for example, here's a very simple rule to apply. You'll notice these two stamps are of Adolf Hitler. They should immediately jump out to you as abnormal. Likewise, this stamp should jump out to you as very, very old. Extremely simplistic rules, but actually quite effective. So if you see odd or extremely old looking stamps, this is another example here, then put those to one side and further research them. You see, one of the important things to note about stamps is a common misconception. People think that the value of a stamp is in what stamp it is. For example, they say, oh, that's an Eisenhower stamp, that must be worth so much, and this is a Washington, and that one's a penny red. And then they ascribe values to it based on what stamp it is. It's far more difficult than that. The value of penny reds varies monstrously. It can be from one extreme to the other based on, for example, this is not a particularly good one. So one of the things you need to look at is the margin on a stamp. This has a really rubbish margin. This has an excellent margin. This is a rubbish margin. This is rubbish. This one's very good. So this, and likewise here. So that helps you determine the value. This is quite a poor example of a penny red, so it isn't worth all that much. Whereas if this had a very nice border and a special cancellation mark, it would be worth a lot more. So let's move on and look at another rule. You'll notice this stamp, and this stamp have these big cancellation marks on them. People actually collect cancellations. This is where the post office has stamped it to say it's been used. These are not worth all that much, really, but what's rare stamps with a good, clear cancellation mark can be worth more because people, for example, in penny reds, people will collect hundreds of cancellations and try and get all the different town marks and put them in a big book. So if you have perhaps a rarer example of that, there may be collectors that are willing to pay a reasonable price for it. You'll notice this one is perhaps the closest I've got to what's called a sock on the nose, just where you get the cancellation mark bang on the centre, and those are quite desirable, especially if you can see the entire cancellation mark on a stamp, so keep an eye out for them. Likewise with this stands up as very old, but stamps that are together are worth more typically than individual ones. This one is slightly more desirable, though not fantastically valuable. This one's more interesting. Sheets are the most valuable. If you get an entire complete sheet of a rare stamp, you're doing very, very well. That's likely to be worth selling. You will get an acceptable price, whereas for most stamps the money you would get on sale, for example, this stamp is an Eisenhower one, and that on a good day you might be able to get 25 cents, so it really isn't worth your while. Very important is that uncancelled stamps are almost always worth more than cancelled stamps. You see this stamp with these lines across it, it's pretty much ruined. That does not look good in a collection. Whereas, interestingly, Hitler stamps, for some reason, are often worth more when they've been used. That's what they seem to believe online. Whereas, if you're putting this in a collection, this stamp is far more desirable, though it's a pretty modern stamp, it's not worth anything. But it looks far better in a collection because it's not been stamped. You would rather put this in a book than that in a book, unless you are, of course, a collector of cancellations. Some more subtle things to look out for. Certain stamps, this is only one example, have watermarks. You can't actually see these, but bizarrely, rare cancellation marks, not cancellation marks, rare watermarks, even though they're not visible to the eye, can be worth substantial sums of money. For example, Stanley Gibbons offers a postage due stamp. They're wanting close to £900, so north of $1,500, for one that has an basically invisible cancellation mark on it. And you can get a dealer could put these in a special machine and would be able to see it. Another really important thing to look out for, if you'll notice in this stamp, it's what we call imperforate along the top and the bottom. So you'll see around this stamp you've got little bits around the edge so it could rip off, whereas on this stamp you don't. These stamps are far more desirable, and these two together are called a coil pair. This is a relatively modern stamp, so it's not worth all that much as a coil pair, but a rare stamp that has those imperforations around the edge can be very desirable. If you were to get a very early Benjamin Franklin or Washington stamp from sort of pre-1900, you could be looking at a substantial sum of money. So really just split your stamps up, looking for things like this, ones that stand out, nice cancellation marks, collections, with an emphasis on ones that are unfranked, so they don't have the mark on them unless they are bang on the centre or look like you would want to put them in a book of cancellations. Don't assume that because it's got a person on it it's worth much. Generally it's not the stamp that people are collecting, but they want a good example of the stamp. Okay, so that's some rules that will help you sort through your stamp collection. And so I'm just going to jump across to the computer where I'll show you some places to look that will give you an idea of the value of stamps, and I'll also give you some pointers on where you can look to sell them once you've identified some, if any, which are of value. So let's just move across and look at that now.
The place I would recommend that you look is the Stanley Gibbons website. Stanley Gibbons are kind of the definitive people when it comes to stamp collecting, and they've launched this huge marketplace that lists just a vast number, millions of different stamps. And by going through here you can get an idea of what's valuable. By just looking at the Great Britain page, you can see that this black one, which is called the penny black, that stands out as a more interesting one and potentially could have quite a high value in the right circumstance. For example, plate 11 is quite complicated. But you see what I was saying about being in sheets grouped together is worth substantially more. You'll notice this one and this one are unused. That jumps its value. And also you notice these examples that are done here. This has a beautiful edge around it. This is about as perfect as you can get. Most stamps are just quite poorly cut, and that substantially reduces its value. As I say, it's not what stamp it is, but the condition of the stamp. So this will give you an idea of what to look for, but beware that this high value at the top end, this is an absolutely perfect example of that stamp, whereas you probably have a more typical example. So try and find the closest comparison. For example, remember that penny red I showed you? This is some penny reds here. These are all pretty terrible examples of a penny red. And some of these will have been stuck in a stamp collection previously, so they'll be what's called hinged. So they'll have a little stamp hinge on the back that substantially reduces the value. So you see these are selling for next to nothing, despite the fact that this is a very old stamp. This is pre-1879. Let's move on and look at some US stamps. You can see these look like extremely common stamps. but these are printed on a special type of paper. These were experimental stamps. Remember what I was saying about this imperforation? This edge and this edge. Notice that one is selling for a very large amount. That's because this is quite rare in this particular stamp. So this is why I tell you keep a hold of any that are imperforated either at the top and the bottom or all the way around. You also want to look out for errors. That's where the highest values are. Remember the Eisenhower stamp? This is very close to the one I had, 4p, going for absolutely nothing. So in general, the vast majority of your stamps are likely to be worth nothing unless you've got some errors, some sock on the nose, some very unusual stamps, or some absolutely perfect examples of highly desirable stamps. In general, just to offload them, if you've just got a huge volume, the most you're likely to get is just by selling them in volume. But go through and check to see if there is anything of interest. Following those rules I've given you, screen through them, and what's left you probably just want to get rid of. Once you've screened through them, what do you do with the good ones? Well, in theory, if you've really got some cracking ones with great time and effort, you could sell them on the Stanley Gibbons website, but really they're not just wanting anyone to set up shop. eBay can typically get quite good values for stamps because there's so many people constantly going through that. All the dealers will be looking at eBay, so you can generally get a fair price on eBay, not the best price. Failing that, going to a dealer, make sure you don't get ripped off, check that the dealer's credentials, and go there armed with substantial knowledge. If you come there knowing absolutely nothing, the chances that you'll get a really good price are much lower. But don't expect full market value. The dealer makes their money by selling on to a collector, and so that takes time and effort. The highest values you can get is selling direct to the collector, but you don't have the contacts that a dealer has. So often selling at a discount to a dealer actually makes sense. So really your options for selling are dealer, auction, or eBay. Or with great time and effort, in theory you can do Stanley Gibbons, but you're better selling it to a dealer who will then do that. And you don't want to be going back and forward to the post office indefinitely trying to sell a huge collection. So well, hopefully this video's been helpful to you and you now know how to go through your stamp collection and pull out the interesting ones for further research. But in general, vast majority of stamps not worth anything. And finally, thank you for watching. I really hope this has been helpful to you.